order.
On the latter half of what you just spoke about, what does contempt look like for the federal government? It's not like they have to spend any of their own money, for example. And so what really can judges do when you hold the federal government in contempt?
There's quite a bit they can do, Brian. There are two kinds of contempt: civil contempt and criminal contempt. Civil contempt is the lesser sanction or penalty, so let's start with that. Civil contempt is designed to put usually monetary fines or other conditions in place to urge the federal government to come into compliance with court orders, to basically what we call purge the contempt, get rid of the contempt by beginning to abide by existing court orders. That's civil contempt. However, if there are Trump administration officials, up to and including Donald Trump, who just intentionally defy and thumb their nose at and disobey court orders, then the judge can say, I am prepared to hold you in criminal contempt. Now, if you're going to hold somebody in criminal contempt, there has to be notice and an opportunity to be heard, basically a mini contempt trial. And here is the really good news, Brian. Ordinarily, judges cannot initiate prosecutions on their own. Why? Because prosecutions are exclusively an executive branch function and responsibility. It's the Department of Justice, under the control now, indeed under the thumb of Donald Trump, that gets to make the decision whether to prosecute a case or not. That generally includes contempt charges, except when the Department of Justice refuses to prosecute a contempt charge that is based on a violation of a judge's court order. Then the judge has the opportunity to appoint an independent prosecutor and have that person prosecute the contempt charge against the federal official. So that is good news on the procedural front. Now, let me tell you, Brian, there's some great law review articles out there that collect up all of the instances of contempt by federal government agencies and officials. And what I will say is, in reading that law review article, rarely does push come to shove. Rarely do judges go all the way to criminal contempt hearings. For example, a cabinet official who just steadfastly refuses to comply with federal court orders. But importantly, the federal judges have the power and the authority to do it. And if ever that power and authority is going to be tested, it looks like it's in this lawless Trump administration.
Can I drop some cold water on this theory and ask, what about presidential pardon powers? I mean, doesn't Trump have carte blanche to basically issue pardons in the event that some administration official of his does get found to be in criminal contempt, that he could just issue a pardon and wipe the slate clean?
Well, I'm going to be honest here. Full disclosure, there is no precedent. In other words, no appellate court, up to and including the Supreme Court, has ever had to wrestle with that precise legal issue that you just spotted. You really have earned your law degree after nearly 500 episodes of the Legal Breakdown that you and I have been doing over the years. It's a great question. Let me give you my informed opinion on how a court would rule. You're absolutely right. Recently, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed just how broad and sweeping a president's pardon power is. However, just as the courts can never appoint a prosecutor except in the instance when their own authority, their own lawful constitutional authority, is being defied by the executive branch, I predict the Supreme Court will say it is a natural follow-on that if there is a criminal contempt conviction of a federal government official under those circumstances, guess what? The president's pardon power doesn't extend to that. Why? Because that is an offense against the judiciary that is necessary to uphold the judiciary's separate but equal powers as a co-equal branch of government, completely untested in the courts. But I actually think that result makes a lot of sense.
Glenn, as the result of this, John Roberts took the rare step of coming out and issuing a rebuke of Donald Trump because Trump logged on to Truth Social, surprise, surprise, demanding that Judge Boasberg actually be impeached for committing the cardinal sin of not allowing him to just he's disappearing people who haven't even been charged with a crime or much less convicted of a crime. And so what do you make of the fact that we actually now have Supreme Court justices on this far-right Supreme Court who are taking a stand against Trump's overreach?
Yeah, a really important statement. And let me say that Chief Justices of the Supreme Court almost never speak publicly about these kind of issues or disputes. Indeed, they usually do all of their speaking through their rulings. But here is what the Chief Justice said after, Elon Musk calls for impeachments of judges who displease, I guess, he and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump actually made some really intemperate remarks about Jeb Boasberg recently. Here is what the Chief Justice said. For more than 2 centuries, the Chief Justice said, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. If I can translate that from justice to English, that is basically John Roberts telling Donald Trump and Elon Musk, shut the hell up. And he's exactly right. These calls that we all know endanger judges when Donald Trump begins to call them names and Elon Musk insists that they must be impeached and removed because they issued some ruling that, displeased Musk and Trump. This is dangerous. We have seen judges like Tanya Chutkin in D.C. and Juan Merchan in New York be put in harm's way. Death threats come pouring in from Trump supporters. Their homes are swatted. In other words, false reports are made to the police that a violent crime happened inside their home, such that SWAT teams show up at judges' homes with guns drawn. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense and garbage and dangerous, inflammatory conduct that really has to stop. And in his, rather subtle way, the Chief Justice of the United States just told Donald Trump and Elon Musk, this has got to stop.
Glenn, you were actually quoted in an article in the Washington Post. I'll put that right here on this screen. This is about Judge Boasberg. You said that Judge Boasberg is a singularly remarkable prosecutor. I say that because he never lost a murder case and because he would never tell anybody he never lost a murder case. It wasn't in his DNA to talk about himself or his accomplishments. I don't think there's anybody better suited or better equipped to handle these challenges to the independence of the judiciary or challenges to American democracy. And so can you talk about these attacks on somebody? Look, it would be one thing if you had a judge who is as partisan as, let's say Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida. But that's not the case with Judge Boasberg, who is deigning to defer not to Donald Trump, but to the law as it's written.
Yeah, Jeb Boasberg, in my experience, and I've known him for decades, not only did I supervise him when he was a homicide prosecutor in my homicide section at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, he was my trial partner. We went to court every day, stood shoulder to shoulder, trying some really horrific murder cases. You want to take the measure of a man or a woman, have them as a trial partner in a, really high stakes murder case. This is a man who is singularly devoted to the rule of law, to the Constitution, and applies, the rules and the laws without fear or favor, fairly and equally, without any bias in favor or against one party or the other. I actually can sleep well at night knowing that we have somebody like Judge Boasberg litigating these most consequential issues, because regardless of how he rules, it's going to be right. It's going to be accurate in accordance with the law and the Constitution. And Brian, people may not remember, they may not have known in the first instance, Judge Boasberg was also the chief of the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, when that whole thing blew up with the Carter Page FISA warrant that was issued, and it had some misinformation in it. Judge Boasberg took a look at what happened there. And after the Durham report came out, remember special counsel John Durham investigate the investigators? Yeah. Well, there was an FBI employee who I believe was a lawyer who was caught altering an email, and that altered information, bad information, false information, made its way into a FISA application. Judge Boasberg went after that so hard, he banned that person from ever having any